Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining the Spark Minerals, Metals and Mining Day, and for taking the interest to stay with us to learn a little bit more about BAS. In terms of where we are and what we do, we are an oil producer out of a very nice, tidy little Indonesian portfolio, and we're generating cash flow, positive cash flow out of our Indonesian investment. Even through the COVID period, we've had no interruptions to production, so we're very pleased about that. We've got a all Indonesian team that manages the production. We actually operate that asset as opposed to being a passive investor, so that gives us an advantage of being in that marketplace. And one thing that COVID has identified for us is the requirement to diversify our portfolio. And so recently we announced that we are taking our first steps into the Cooper Basin in South Australia, which is one of the, if not the largest hydrocarbon basin onshore in Australia. It's certainly one of the premier basins, and that the team at BAS has spent a lot of time here before. And we're pretty excited about our initial investment, and we'll describe to you the package of assets that we're going to settle on here in probably around about the middle of this month, being October, or the back end of this month, to then join the ranks of producers in the Cooper Basin. The Cooper Basin, as well as offering us a diversification of our portfolio, also gives us an opportunity to build. Our target is to build a producing company. In the first instance, we're targeting 1,000 barrels of oil a day to be a producer, and we think that that's possible in the first 12 or 18 months of us being in the Cooper Basin. And I'll just give you an idea of how that's going to happen, where that's going to come from. The other thing in the Cooper Basin too, it is a hotspot in Australia for carbon capture and storage initiatives. I was involved in some studies in the early days of CCUS, and there wasn't the policy settings in Australia to really move that forward. But CCUS is an exciting development for the future in Australia, from a climate perspective, yes, of course, but there are some business initiatives that will spin off of that. And the Cooper Basin is a great place to actually be able to tap into CCUS also. We have plenty of experience in the Cooper as well. We'll show you that shortly. And importantly, for investors that want a low-cost entry into a portfolio that is producing oil, is positive cash flow, and into the Cooper Basin, we represent a pretty reasonable investment in that regard. In terms of the team, that's the board of directors and senior executives. And I'd like to highlight really, well, I can touch on all of us, but Hector Gordon and myself. Hector was a senior executive and chief operating officer from Beach Petroleum. At the same time, I started in my first senior executive role as managing director of Stewart Petroleum. In the early 2000s, when the Cooper Basin got opened up, and at Beach and Stewart were the leaders in the opening up of the Cooper Basin post the lock that Santos and Co had in the basin up until the year 2000. And Stewart, which was the company I was leading, that got bought by Cenex, as it was, in the late, just before 2010, or around about 2010. That made a handsome profit for shareholders, which is very good. And Beach has gone on to bigger and better things, and it's in the top 5 Australian E&P companies. And an advisor, Mark Lind, was an advisor to Beach at the time through that phase of growth, and Peter Mullins was a banker to Stewart and beach at the time. And the leader of our Indonesian operation, and this is what's really quite interesting, Andrew Lutfi, has got a PhD. He's got a master's in geology and a PhD in petroleum engineering, and the PhD in petroleum engineering is in enhanced oil recovery and CO2 injection, in fact. And as part of that, BAS is a co-holder of a patent that Andrew holds along with the Institute of Technology in Bandung, which is a premier petroleum university there. It's a slim tube test kit which tests miscibility of hydrocarbons with various injection fluids, be it CO2 or hydrocarbon gases. So we've got a very interesting mix of skills and ready to move forward with our portfolio going. We're a 55% interest holder in the South Sumatra Basin. We've got a small property highlighted in yellow there in a very oily part of South Sumatran Basin. It's a pretty steady producer, and we will be uplifting production there to its capacity with a drilling program starting in February of 2022. We've just had our procurement plan and the well approved by Pertamina. So we're now procuring the rig, and we expect to be spudding sometime in early to mid-January. And that well is in one of the two fields that we operate, in the Tangai field, which is down in the bottom right. That white dot is the Tangai 5 location. It's up dip, and it's a very high rate well. And we expect it to be able to produce in excess of 1,000 barrels a day when it comes online initially. So that'll give that a fillip, a shot in the arm. And the one of the other producing fields there is the Bunyan field, and you can see that our last reservoir studies have identified an extension which we've taken into the 3P reserves account. And if that extension comes in, which we'll be drilling in late 22 or early 23, that extension comes in, that will actually be a 50% increment of the 2P reserves. As well as something else that we're doing from the enhanced oil recovery perspective is we've been collaborating with ITB University in Bandung and South Korean universities, and we've received an injection skid from Korea, and we're putting it in place to trial low salinity water injection, which studies have indicated that we can get a 3 to 5% increase in recovery factors from the field. So when we're talking about a recovery factor of about 40% of the oil in place, 3 to 5% is a pretty significant increase. And low salinity water injection, I won't go into it now, but low salinity water injection is something that we can, that has significant application in the South Sumatran Basin and in other oil basins in Indonesia. Now, our new investment into the Cooper Basin. For those of you that don't know the Cooper Basin, I've got a couple of slides that gives you background. It is one of the biggest basins in Australia. You can see that little cartoon there, shows you where it is. We will be in joint venture with Beach Energy, and which is one of the become one of the oil majors, if you will, in Australia. And we have, as part of the portfolio that we're buying, is an interest in the Warrior oil field, which was discovered incidentally at Stewart Petroleum by my team when I was there. And again, the Cooper Basin, as I said, has a CCUS potential that we're looking to tap. I won't spend long on this slide. For those of you that want to know a little bit more about the Cooper Basin, the image really says it all here. In blue, you can see an outline of the Cooper Basin that stretches across the South Australian and Queensland area of Australia. Our assets are in the South Australian area, which is the more prolific area. But while there is significant gas and some oil potential in Queensland, many of the discoveries you can see there from the image in the reds and the blues, there's a lot of gas being discovered in South Australian sector. You can see our properties are in the blue there at the margins of the basin, where a lot of oil has been discovered over the last half a dozen years, and so those properties are pretty nicely positioned, and you can actually see the colorations that go from orange to yellow to green. That is source rock generation potential, and you can see that our properties are in a really nice spot for source rock generation. But there are also some statistics there for your interest as to what the Cooper Basin is producing now, in effect. In terms of the portfolio we're buying, you can see on the map, we're buying a 20 to 30% interest, non-operated, in those permits that you see in blue. On the bottom left-hand side, you can see PPL 207, just barely. You'll see a blow up of that in a subsequent slide in a moment. That's a production license for the Warrior oil field, and that this purchase in itself, which is rather inexpensive, will result in a 10% increase in our 2P reserves reserves, 2P reserves, and our contingent resources, an increase of 200,000 barrels, and I'll show you what that kind of means in a moment. We also have in the other permits, the PRLs are retention licenses, and they contain some really interesting exploration potential in the margins of the Cooper Basin. And this just gives you the top 3 prospects that are drill ready in each of those groupings of permits. I call them XPEL 93, 100 and 110. Stuart had 93 and 110 in their portfolio, and 100 in their portfolio when I was there. So I know the properties quite well, and we were adjacent to 110. So there is exploration upside at a material interest level, which can augment our strategy of looking for late life assets with improvement potential. And we also want to have access to some exploration potential, which gives you fresh assets to produce. So this is the Warrior field. It was discovered that had around about 4.5 million barrels of 2P reserves from the 2 main producing zones. Although there are 4 oil zones. The main producing zones were the McKinley and the Birkhead, and they are quite late life. The current production of the field is 40 barrels a day. There'll be some small work that we're doing now. We'll take production back up to 100 barrels a day, JV share, and the JV remaining reserves are 180. But there are some, there are two upside potentials here. One is there's some water shut-off programming. These wells have not actually been curated particularly well as they transition to late life. Obviously, we at Stuart discovered this field, and the field has not actually changed too much since we ran it. And there are 2 zones, the Murder and the Patchawarra, that are, well, the Murder is untouched completely and the Patchawarra is underdeveloped. The Murder and the Patchawarra has contingent resources of 670,000 barrels, which is very high on my priority list to actually look to tap into, to increase reserves and clearly to increase production, as well as some water shut-off opportunities in the existing wells high on the structure. So there's plenty of low cost, low risk ways to augment production. And at this oil price, well, this hydrocarbon price, whether it be oil or gas, in our case oil, we're at the top of we're getting close to the top of this part of the cycle, and we're throwing off pretty decent margins both in Indonesia and here as well in Australia. I guess in summary, this is kind of a picture tells 1,000 words. So you can see that we have now two arms to our business. We had a producing property in Indonesia. Our business development activity in Indonesia has been curtailed over the last couple of years due to COVID. I'm still very bullish in Indonesia, and we have very strong relationships there because by virtue of the fact that we operate. So I'm still pretty keen in when in a post-COVID world, I have my eye on some very interesting opportunities in Indonesia, but we had to balance the portfolio out with something, and the Cooper Basin was a natural fit because the Cooper Basin is at the beginning of another rationalisation of portfolios. All of the basin has pretty much been held in the hands of the two largest players, being Santos and Beach, and now each of those companies have gotten to the point where growth for them corporately, they need to be seeking opportunities, larger opportunities around Australia. And in Santos's case, of course, they're merging with Oil Search in PNG. And the portfolio that Beach is running is all over Australia, particularly in Western Australia for growth, and in the BAS Basin. So, but where the Cooper Basin is not particularly material to those two companies anymore, they will be looking to divest of some really interesting properties that we know very well, and we're positioning ourselves to add to our first investment in the basin. And I want you to be really clear that this is our first investment in the basin, and that this will be, we're positioned now, and we're leveraging even already in this first investment, we're leveraging our relationships to actively explore the further investments adding to this portfolio. So these next 12 months are going to be a tremendously interesting, dynamic and noteworthy 12 months in the life of BAS in building this balanced portfolio, both in Indonesia and in the Cooper Basin. And I am extremely, extremely positive about our future. So just to summarize, we've got, it's no secret here, we're in a strong oil price environment, which is very, very useful for us to throw off the cash flow that we need to add to production and reserves, because that's one of the big measurements of growth. We're looking to optimize the number of wells and their configuration in our portfolio, and we are positioned nicely for Santos and Beach as they invest in carbon capture and storage out of the Moomba plant, and their reticulation system will be available for others to tap into. So that's a really nice tertiary growth initiative, and we can play a part in that too. In terms of our appraisal and development, we see plenty of potential for growth in the Warrior asset and in Indonesia. We have exploration in our portfolio, and clearly one of the main pillars of our growth is to build on the acquisition of other properties, of which we have quite a number of discussions ongoing. So as I said, this is a particularly exciting time in BAS's history, and as the very last point in my first slide, BAS represents a very, very low cost of entry for those that want exposure into both Indonesia and the Cooper Basin in Australia. And at that point, Timothy, I'm happy to hand it over to questions.